So I'm Madison. It's nice to see everybody here in the chat and online. I'm the program coordinator for PEN America's Freedom to Read program, and we're so excited to have you here today. We're here with Peter Bromberg from EveryLibrary, Philomena Polefrone from American Booksellers Association, and Laura Benitez from PEN America. So with that, I will hand it over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and taking the time to spend with us. We're excited to have you here. I'm going to start with some basics, and thank you, Maddie, for the introduction. My name is Laura. I'm the State Policy Manager for PEN America's Free Expression Programs, U.S. Free Expression Programs. And I also am a former nonpartisan legislative staffer, so I'm going to just try to give you a little bit of insight to navigating legislative websites and just some little tips from my end of things. So to start off, we're going to just talk about PEN America really quickly. PEN America stands at the intersection of literature and human rights, protecting free expression in the US and worldwide. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit, so we don't take positions on political candidates or elections. We are going to give you a little bit of an overview of the kinds of bills that attack the freedom to read and that we're going to be interested in fighting against here, but we won't be talking about any particular candidates, campaigns, etc. So, as you all may be aware, there are many types of harmful pieces of legislation that have been proposed this year and have been recurring themes throughout the last few years. And so, some of you may be very familiar with all of these, and some of you may be new. So, we wanted you to give you a little bit of an idea of the kinds of things that you're looking for. So, one of the big ones is statewide ban bills. These are bills that might give a state level government entity the right to decide what materials can be in any district statewide, or provide some other mechanism for statewide bans. So, one district might ban a book and then every other district might have to do the same. Another category is what we call obscenity and sensitive materials bills. These use language, weaponizing language like obscenity to censor topics in books. We also have reader acts, which are really book rating bills. These require publishers to put some kind of rating on their materials and then prohibit schools or libraries from providing those materials that might, be of a certain rating or above to minors. Another category is these don't say gay or don't display gay bills. These might use language, they might explicitly prohibit instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity specifically, but they also might use vague language. It's a lot of these are vague language, but this one in particular, they might use terms like human sexuality, prohibiting instruction on that. And we know that that's really a smokescreen for wanting to ban certain topics. The other category that you might have heard about before is divisive concept bans. So if you're familiar with the crusade against critical race theory, these bills, list a list of concepts that supposedly are tenets of critical race theory, but really what they do is they censor all sorts of discussions around really complex, important discussions around race, gender, ethnicity, national origin, sex, etc. Another one is red scare bills. These are exactly what they sound like. Lawmakers mandating curriculum about communism, but very specifically and distinctly from an anti-communist perspective, and providing very specific tenets of what students have to be taught about, about this. The last category we have here is just a catch-all category of other bills that are censorship that make it easier to ban books. They might use language like the Parental Bill of Rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion language, language around anti-abortion, sex ed, or providing religious exemptions and opt-outs and things like that. So obviously, it can look a lot of different ways. Lawmakers are getting more and more creative in the ways that they're doing this. So this is just kind of a high level of the different categories you might see here. And it's important to remember, none of these bills exist in isolation. It's all part of just this national movement in censorship. So important to know all of these aspects here. So moving into what are we going to do about it? In the legislative process, you all maybe have seen, I shouldn't say you all have seen, but you might have seen graphics on legislative websites that are really complex and show a lot of different steps. And while I would say, I encourage you to take a look at that if you get the chance, because it might provide you some insight of what all the different really specific steps mean. The main three ones that you need to know are here. And they also vary across, the specifics will vary across states. So these are the main ones that this is the standard that you'll see in every state. So you'll have your bill introduction, where the bill is published online and often is referred to a committee at that same time. And so then you'll be able to start, searching for bills that meet some of this criteria and that you want to testify against. And then when the bill is heard in committee, this is where your opportunity for public testimony comes. So there are other steps that happen between committee and a full vote, but this is designated time for lawmakers to hear from you, the public, their constituents. There might be legislatures that hear a bill a few times, and there might be before they vote on it through the committee, and there might be legislatures who only hear it once. So good things for you to know as far as the specifics for your state, but just know that that's where you want to be providing your input. And then the last thing to know is just that this happens once in each chamber, just like in the federal government, there's the House and the Senate. That's what it happens in almost every state. If you live in Nebraska, you might know that you only have one chamber, but everybody else has two. So that does mean that you will almost definitely have two opportunities to testify. So if you realize that a bill that you want to testify on has already gone through one chamber, you have another chance. If you want to really make sure that you want to talk to everybody about this bill, maybe you go to the committee hearing in both chambers. Those are all options there. So then the next question is, how do you figure all of this out? So how do you know when a bill is going to be in a committee, and how do you figure out where you should go for that? So as I mentioned, legislative websites can be very confusing. There are different states sometimes have really, really sleek ones and some not so much. So it's going to vary a little bit by state, and I would encourage everybody to spend some time poking around on those websites. But some tips and direction for where to go is you'll go to your legislative website. You can start by going to, if they have a bill tracker or a bill page, and typing in the name of the bill, or if you don't know the number of the bill, excuse me, or if you don't know the number, typing in keywords. That will then hopefully take you to that bill's page. And then you'll see the committee might say referred to this committee or assigned to that committee. And then sometimes it might have the hearing date there on that page as well. Another way to go about this is looking under a committees tab or page or a calendar page. Like I said, it's going to vary across states. So some states may have a full calendar of all committee meetings, or there might be a page on the specific committee website or web page that gives you those specific agendas. So you'll have to poke around, find the agenda there, and then that should have the date, time, and the room in the building. I would also say if you arrive and something changes, just pay attention, be checking to see if something has changed, and just keep checking back. The other thing I will say is that you might not see a bill on an agenda for the first few weeks after it's introduced, and you're just going to have to keep checking back and seeing if it has been assigned. And sometimes you don't get, or rather if it's been added to an agenda, and sometimes you don't get a lot of notice. So sometimes legislature websites do have the ability to notify you if you sign up when a bill is put on an agenda, but certainly not every state is like that. So then what do you do when you're actually getting to speak to the committee? So Philomena and Peter are going to give you all of the advice on crafting the testimony, but sometimes the logistics itself can be difficult. So when you go, there might be instructions on the legislative website of how to sign up for testimony, but not every state does this. There are states where you have to go in person in order to sign up. There are states that give you instructions on how to do it, and some states that don't. But always poke around on the website, see what you can find. Some committees might list a time limit, and that's going to be good for you to know as you craft your testimony. And then if all else fails and you can't figure out what you're supposed to do, try calling the office of the chamber. Try Google searching. Sometimes Reddit will have information for you, and then you'll kind of be able to figure it out from there. And I will say, if you walk into a building and you know that you want to testify on a bill, if you ask someone there, someone will help you and figure out where to go and how to sign up and that kind of thing. There are people who that's their job. Um, so the other things to consider before you walk into that building, though, are who is on the committee that you're speaking to. So who are the members? You can usually find that on the website as well, looking up specific names, and then looking at what kind of votes, public statements about library and education issues, or just finding things that they've talked about their values and how you can tie your testimony and your arguments to that. And I'm sure Peter and Philomena will be talking about that as well. And so with all of that, the answer to a lot of these questions is it varies by state. So what we have done, PEN America's incredible state policy intern has created a 50-state resource discussing how to find agendas and where the websites provide the information, how to sign up to testify. So we will be sending that out to you all after this. And we really hope that it's useful and provides a lot of great direction. So that is to come for you all. And then just lastly, a couple of things that I'd like to leave you with as a former legislative staffer, some thoughts that I have is really, and probably you'll hear so many different people telling you this, but your voice really does matter. It not only matters to the community who these bills affect as you build the sense of community and knowing that you are not alone in this, but also even when it doesn't really change a legislator's mind, they do care well, I shouldn't say they all care, but many of them really do care about your vote. So if you go in there and you say, I'm the constituent of so and so, that is going to get their attention. And it's the kind of thing that not only, well, it might not change a particular vote in a committee or a particular vote on the floor, but it can sometimes. There might be more moderate members who are kind of on the fence. Maybe they don't really want to vote for the bill, but they're getting pressure from others. And this is the kind of thing, your voice, that can provide cover. So rather than submitting to the pressure of their party, they can say, my constituents don't want this bill. And I know because they came to the committee. So it's not always something that is always going to work. And I know it can feel useless sometimes, but it really, really does matter and can make a difference. And it can also be a reference to other states, when they're considering potential legislation that is similar, they might be able to look at what previous testimony has discussed about how these bills are going to impact their constituents. So those are just a few insights that I wanted to just remind everyone of as far as remembering that your voice really does matter, and pass it on to Philomena then, or Peter, I can't remember. Sorry.
Yeah, that's me next.
Okay.
Everyone, as Madison said, I'm Philomena Polefrone, she, her. I am with the American Booksellers Association, and I'm the Associate Director of American Booksellers for Free Expression, which is our free expression advocacy initiative. So my background, which, Laura's coming from legislative staffer place, I am coming from a teaching writing perspective. And so I mentioned that because I'll be jumping in after Peter talks about some of the more advanced strategy to give you some writing prompts. You're going to feel like you're back in college. But in the meantime, I really just want to talk about planning out your message, the basics of how you can make the impact that you want to make on the people you need to reach. And the short version, just to jump right to the bottom line, is you're not necessarily going to make the argument that you are most excited about or the argument that you feel deepest in your heart. You're going to make the argument that you can support, that you can back up with receipts, and that is going to potentially change the minds of the people whose minds you need to change. So if you're like me, you are going to want to go into these testimonies saying, this is horrible. All of these books that are so beautiful and diverse and are representing so many different perspectives are being silenced. Here's the thing. The people who are going to be motivated by that argument already agree with you. That's not who you're trying to convince. What you need to do instead is seek a bipartisan message, seek a message that is going to matter to people who aren't going to want necessarily to listen to the testimony, who are going to come in wanting to vote one way, and you're trying to convince them to vote another by introducing new information that they haven't thought of. So some examples of that, the financial impacts of something that is going to happen. So I represent booksellers in cases like the Reader Act that Laura was talking about, that actually wasn't publishers rating books. That was supposed to be booksellers rating books, which literally would have put some bookstores out of business in Texas. We've been fighting that. It did pass, but booksellers going in and testifying against that bill, you could see it actually starting to change some people's minds. There was a legislator who said, we've killed bills in this committee because it would have made it harder for one person to sell a puppy to someone. And so if the impacts that this bookseller is talking about are real, that changes everything. So if you have a financial angle that you can make there, it's so important. And that doesn't necessarily need to be small business. That can also be the costs of implementation. These are your tax dollars that are being used in some cases to spend tens of thousands of dollars on staffing review committees, on paying for software to make it easier to review books for problems that aren't there. These are all things that can be used better. And we'll talk about how to make those numbers really land when we get to the receipts section. But another approach that you can take here is that book bans, and probably, actually, if we can go back to the previous slide, thank you, that book bans um, are going to worsen students' career prospects. That's something that every parent, uh, every legislator who needs to try to speak for parents is going to care about. Um, and in some cases, with most of these bills, and especially the ones that are expanding obscenity definitions or harmful to minor definitions, those are going to have unintended consequences that the legislators might not have considered. So in this case, it means removing books that you're pretty sure they don't want removed. So maybe there are some books that they are trying to ban, right? Or that they're in favor of banning. You want to talk about the books that are going to get swept up, that are going to, the baby that is going to get thrown out with the bathwater from their perspective. So when you're introducing yourself, this is step 2. You want to briefly introduce yourself in a way that is letting people know why they should care what you in particular have to say. So Laura already covered some of this. You want to mention your district. You want to mention where you're a constituent. Sorry, I have 2 cats who are really determined to make an impact on this presentation. So sorry if you can hear them. Mention your district, who you're a constituent of, especially if you're the constituent of someone on the committee. But it's also a matter of whether you or your family or your kids go to the school in the area or use the library, or maybe your kids are former students, maybe you're a former student. Parent testimony here is so, so important. It's the reason that it's so important in this particular moment is because everyone is being sold this bill of goods that book bans are about parents' rights. Well, they are, but for the most part, they're about infringing on parents' rights. And so having parents' voices in the room who are saying, sorry, this isn't defending my rights. I don't want any part of this. That is so important to push back on the message that some other people are putting out there. And then finally, think about if you have some special insight into the argument that you're going to make. So if you're making a financial argument, is this something where maybe you've been on the school board, or you are currently on the school board and you have some insight into how that money is used? Maybe you are someone whose kid was in a program that was cut for lack of funding. These are all things that can really make your particular position that you're speaking from matter. And I would also say if you hold other professional roles or expertise that inform your insight, maybe you are an author, maybe you used to be a librarian, maybe whatever you can point to that says, hey, I know what I'm talking about here. That's the way that you want to introduce yourself. So step 3 is the lead. This is a little bit of journalistic jargon, which means the basics of your argument. Again, former writing professor, this is your thesis statement. The reason that this is so important is because when there are a lot of people testifying, and for some of these bills, there are a ton of people testifying, these sessions can go sometimes into the night. Um, Sometimes they will cut people's time. And even if they don't cut your time, they're listening to literally sometimes hundreds of people give testimony. You need to get your argument out there in in concise and as impactful as possible terms. You need to say it at the beginning, and step five, to spoil the ending, will be repeat it. So you're going to say this twice. Here are some examples. This bill is broader than intended. This bill will be impossible or expensive to comply with for the school district or if you're some other party who has a stake in it. This bill will deter young readers. So important. This bill will create a hostile atmosphere for our business. That one is really kind of catered at booksellers, but I left it in here because I think that this could be something that is relevant to more businesses just than that. So, step four, part one. Step four is receipts. This is what you need to show people to make your argument impossible to ignore. You need to show them the evidence, show them you're backing up whatever however you introduced yourself, whatever basic argument you're making. So when you're introducing yourself, right, when you want to say, I have been a librarian for 40 years in this community, or I have been a bookseller for 10 years, or, my all three of my kids have been in the school district. I've been going to school board meetings for 20 years. Anything like that, which, I'm sort of speaking to a certain age demographic here, I guess, but anything like that that you can point to say, I have seen everything come and go, and this is ridiculous. Maybe there are examples of ways that you've seen some of this mania around banning books impact your community. Maybe there's some way that the school or library has benefited you or your kids that you're seeing under threat. You want to say this quickly. I'm Peter Bromberg. I'm a former librarian, and I'm seeing my former colleagues go through hell. I don't know, maybe don't say hell, depends what state. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So the receipts for the financial impacts. If you're making a claim that this is going to be super expensive, how do you know? What can you point people to say, no, you need to take this seriously because I have this piece of evidence. So, for example, if there's a similar state that you can find that has passed a similar policy and there's data on what it costs there, that could be a really good example. Maybe there are other examples from the state where book ban hearings have cost tens of thousands of dollars, which check the news. Sometimes there are plenty of examples of that happening. And if you can reframe that cost in terms of something that is going to put it into perspective for people. So, for example, in at some point, I was able to reframe a number in terms of the number of school lunches that money could buy instead. That's the kind of thing that says, like, hey, if we're going to put this money to use for something, it shouldn't be this. There's so many better ways to use it. But don't frame it necessarily in terms of what you care about. What I would care about is how many books can we buy for the library. But the people that you're talking to might be more interested in other aspects that, maybe it's more teacher salaries, right? Because that's jobs. Maybe it's football stadiums, whatever. I th Yeah, and so in terms of financial impacts, just think about how you can make it land and how you can back it up. There we go. So the receipts for if you're saying that a bill is going to have broader impacts than are intended, look to see if you can find an example of a book where prohibitions on nudity and sexual content would ban books that everyone would say this is an undeniably innocent book. So, for example, recently, actually, I think since 2021, four school districts have banned Eric Carle's Draw Me a Star because there is a picture of Adam and Eve in which they're nude. So that to me is a doubly difficult argument to make. One, because this is Eric, very hungry caterpillar Carl, right? That's who we're talking about. Two, the nudity in question is Adam and Eve, right? This is not what the book bans are supposed to sweep up. So if you can find examples like that and tie it to the language of the bill to say why that language would make it almost obligatory to ban a book like Draw Me a Star, you can do that. Another strategy here is that you can imagine you're trying to apply the laws maliciously. Look for a way that you, if you were a bad actor, could abuse this law, work backwards from that language, and try to find the problems with the way the bill is written. So if you were going to manipulate it, where would you look? And then finally, the thing I want to point out here is watching specifically for bills that remove the condition to consider the literary and artistic merit of the work as a whole. That's where you're going to find potentially examples of books that are getting swept up. You're pretty sure they don't want to include. So one last point about the receipts, be ready for them to challenge you. Um, so this is part of the reason you want receipts, and you might have some receipts that you don't put in your testimony. Keep them on hand anyway, because in some cases, people who don't want to listen to you will look for an occasion to cast doubt on the testimony you've given. I've seen this happen in response to bookseller testimony in some cases. It might not be the point of your argument. It could be a minor point that you've made that is just sort of a throwaway point that you didn't think too hard about. They're going to potentially, I should say you should be ready for people to try to discredit a minor inconsequential point in order to discredit your entire argument, without actually attacking the argument as a whole. And take a breath, be cool, try to face down any misrepresentations of your argument. This could, and by the way, this could be by other people in the room, though I don't think, usually it's more orderly, one would hope. But it could be other people who are just trying to rile you up in some way. Don't get rattled. And I'll go quickly through these last three slides, which are other kind of traps to watch out for. Oh, and the last step was just repeat. I already said that. You know what that means. Okay, so let's look at the first trap. Don't lose your head. We all want to be Lisa Simpson in this. We all want to say the whole damn system is wrong and kick the desk over. Don't do it. It's not worth it. The next trap. Don't overcomplicate it. You have at most 2 minutes, maybe in some cases 30 seconds. You need to make the simplest version of your argument that will be most impactful. And finally, practice. Practice a 2-minute version, practice a 1-minute version, practice a 30-second version in case they cut the time down. You don't want to run over, and especially this is why you need to have your main argument at the beginning clear, concise, and impactful. Okay, and with that, so that was the 101. Peter's going to give you the 102, if not the 201.
Thank you, Philomena. Will you be advancing slides today? I wasn't clear. So I'll just briefly introduce myself, Peter Bromberg. I'm with EveryLibrary, the Associate Director for EveryLibrary. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that seeks to build voter support for libraries across the country. And I will be talking about the three types of witness testimony: positive, negative, and rebuttal. And this is the 102 level. So everything Philomena just shared, especially if you're new at this, great advice, stick to it. If you're a little bit more comfortable or you've done some testimony in the past, these are things that will be, a slightly advanced. So first we're going to talk about positive testimony. And in fact, framing this as a type of witness, a positive witness. And you're focusing, even if you're testifying against a bill, you're doing so by focusing on positive things. For instance, you're focusing on positive outcomes for people, a population that might be impacted, right? A place, a community, or systems or institutions, right? Institution might be the library, the institution might be a school, etc. A system might be a system of funding. But you're talking about positive outcomes if we vote no on this bill, or if you vote yes on this bill, but you're focusing on the positive. You want to base it on things like shared rights, American rights, neighborliness in our community, right? It appeals to the mission of government, and good government can oftentimes be invoked here. So it's not partisan, right? We're not talking about you have to support this or that necessarily, but we can all support good government, transparency, fact-based decision making, fact-based decision making, et cetera, right? We want to base it on a set of values and appeals to morals and to human dignity. So that's a relatively universal appeal, right? And based again on this idea of community identity, like this isn't who we are as Mayberryans or wherever it is you live, Springvillians if you're Lisa Simpson, right? Um, and lastly, you want to encourage a no vote or a yes vote if you're encouraging the yes vote, because this isn't how things should be, right? But you definitely want to have that call to action, as it were, right? And as Philomena had pointed out, in the beginning and at the end, a key point, and including we ask you to vote yes, we ask you to vote no. Sometimes it's we ask you to send this to study. Whatever your ask is, make sure that's very clear up front and to conclude. Let's look at some examples here. And I always like to provide examples because here's the concept. This is maybe what it looks like in practice. So you can think of these as quote, right? As Mayberryans, we've always prided ourselves as a kind and welcoming place. Therefore, we must reject this bill that seeks to divide and demonize our family members and neighbors. And that therefore is either stated or implied in these types of examples. There's a therefore involved. We have library collections that represent everyone's experiences because everyone has inherent dignity. Therefore, we ask that this bill not pass. Our schools have always been a safe place where kids are prepared to succeed in whatever path they take in life. Therefore, this bill, which stigmatizes some students, must not pass. And last example, parents trust board members they have elected locally in their community to have fair and orderly policies to govern our school libraries. This bill removes that local control and upends the fair processes we already have in place. Therefore, this bill must be voted down. So those are just some examples, and you can infer from those examples what types of bills we're being testified against, right? So that brings us to the second type of witness testimony, and that's negative testimony. And again, you can use you're focusing on the harms. You can talk about if this bill passes, these are the harms. If this bill doesn't pass, these are the harms. But we want to define the potential negative consequences of the bill, and not just for the legislator. So we want to think about the legislator. Obviously, we're trying to convince legislators. There's times where we're testifying where there's a very slim chance, right, that they're going to listen to us or take the action we want. But they're not our only audience. The media is also our audience. Other stakeholders are also our audience, because this is an opportunity to shape the narrative more broadly, right? So have the press take some of our quotes and some of our points and shape that narrative. And we're also talking to other people, other voters, other community members, and trying to help them understand and get on our side. We want to name the harms to people, place, or systems if the bill passes, again, and help connect the dots between this bill and the harm it will cause, right? If it passes, it's going to harm our community. It's going to harm this population of humans. It's going to harm the system that we have, this institution that we have, et cetera. And we also want to note the dangers of unanticipated consequences or collateral damage. And that goes back to Philomena's excellent point also about kind of thinking about how could this be weaponized if it's passed and work backwards, right? So if you pass this bill, I know you're trying to ban that, but this is also going to go, right? So some of those challenges we see sometimes for challenging the Bible in schools and things like that as a way of highlighting these unanticipated consequences. And there might be strategic value or not in any given situations doing that. The next one is offer examples of negative consequences that will happen because they've happened elsewhere. I mean, we've seen a lot of these bills already passed in different places. And I'm also thinking about not just legislative, but at school districts, at public libraries, right? There's policies that are passing that you may also wish to give testimony or public comment on. And we can look to other places and say, well, look what happened there. Look at how much money it cost them because they're tied up in lawsuits. Look at how it divided the community, et cetera, right? And again, we want to appeal to that morals or a set of values when we're doing the negative testimony. All right. So here are some examples. This bill overrides local control and imposes state solutions on trusted local boards that were elected by their neighbors. Right? We see a lot of this where the state's coming in and overriding school districts and public library boards. If this bill passes, our LGBTQ plus students who are already at higher risk of suicide will be in even greater danger due to increased stigma and lack of access to books that reflect their lives. If this bill passes, our libraries may have to close, harming the veterans, the new arrivals, the students, the parents, the small business people, the seniors we serve on a daily basis. If this policy passes, the district will open itself up to expensive lawsuits, and we will irresponsibly waste taxpayer money. So again, some examples to kind of ground those concepts. Let's look at rebuttal testimony. Um, so rebuttal testimony focuses on responding directly to and rebutting the arguments that are being made by the opposing side. Um, if okay, I'll keep this. I'm not going to overcomplicate this, right? We want to refute, we want to counter and dismantle opponents' points, identify weaknesses, identify inconsistencies, present factual evidence to counter false claims. And it's important to remember that we're not necessarily just rebutting what was literally said by others in testimony, right? But what's being shared out there in the ecosystem, in the press and social media, right? You know what's being said. You read comments on news articles, you see Facebook posts, you know what's being said, even if it wasn't said in testimony. And we can assume that legislators are hearing these things too. So we do want to rebut what's out there in the ethers as well. And then we want to wrap up the argument. And if possible, this is approach it. This witness should go last. You can't always coordinate, but if you have an opportunity to coordinate with other people, rebuttals witness going last can say, well, we heard X, we heard Y, we heard we heard the positive reasons, we heard the negative aspects, and we heard some falsehoods, right? But here's the truth of the matter. But you can't always arrange that, and I would recommend that if you can only give a testimony, rebuttal is sort of the icing on the cake. If there's only one person giving testimony, you don't want to go to rebuttal. Like go to the positive, go to the negative testimony. So, okay, let's see some examples here of rebuttal. So here's an example. Let's be clear. You are being lied to and misled by them. We know that books help kids protect themselves from those who might do harm. Predators win when kids lack knowledge, right? So there's an example of a rebuttal. You've heard some interesting testimony today, but don't let them fool you. Let's set the record straight here. Parents trust teachers and librarians over big government and politicians. They are misrepresenting our position. We support parents in being informed and making good reading choices for their family. If they are misstating these basic facts, what else are they misstating? We need to put this bill on hold and investigate, right? So if you highlight some of the inconsistencies or the falsehoods, you can also use that as we need to dig a little deeper into what the truth is here. So maybe we need to put this on hold and not advance the bill, right? So those are the three examples of types of witnesses. Let's go ahead and I'm going to pass the mic back to Philomena, and we're going to try to put this all together and practice a little bit.
Okay, so it's not the exam. You're not going to have to share it with anybody, but I do want you to take out something to write with if you can. That can be your notes app, it can be a piece of paper, whatever works for you. And we're going to try to start putting some of these pieces together. And we'll go through the steps that I threw out before. So the first step is you're going to strategize. So I want you to go back and maybe actually once I go through this, whoever is controlling the slide, if we can go back to the types of bill really quickly after I go through the slide. So you're going to pick a type of bill to prepare for it. And I want you to take a few minutes and think about what you in particular, whatever your position is, whatever your sort of role in the community is, what you in particular can say that will persuade a skeptical lawmaker. So let's go back to some of the types of bill because you actually had more than I have here, right? So these are the types of bill. Take a few minutes and I want you to actually write out the basic argument and how you would introduce yourself to emphasize that you're someone they should listen to. And I'm going to do the same thing, right? So we're all going to do it together. And if anyone is feeling super brave and wants to throw it in the chat, you're invited to. Again, not required. I'll put mine in the chat. I'll go first. Okay, so you can still put yours in the chat if you're feeling brave. But let's go back to the second slide in this section. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to turn to the receipts, and you're just going to outline it. Just think about what are a couple of examples of evidence. Let's actually focus on the receipts part of the slide. Try to pick 2 or 3 things that you would use to support that argument. Again, I'll do it too. I think my colleagues here are maybe doing it too, so maybe they're feeling brave. I want to throw in the chat. But I'll put some examples of what I would use to support the argument that I just put in the chat. Remember, there are a few different kinds of receipts here. This could be receipts about how you introduced yourself. I'm not going to literally bring my diploma to it, right? But I can talk about where I taught, what I taught, briefly. Receipts to your main argument. Maybe it's a financial argument. Maybe it's about the types of books that would be swept up. take another minute or two. Peter's being brave, throwing an argument in there. Thank you. Okay, I'll read Peter's here. As a former young adult librarian, I know that parents were thankful that their teenagers had access to this book, and it gave them, as a parent, an opportunity to have meaningful discussions with their child and help navigate some difficult conversations. This is a really good one for a divisive concepts, text, or even potentially ones that are being targeted because they have any description of sexuality. The point is that this can create a discussion, right? You would rather have a kid hearing about this in books and then talking about it with their parents than hearing about it on the playground or, wherever and getting misinformation about it. And Carolyn, thank you. Carolyn gave me another one. As the spouse of a teacher, I know how much money and effort teachers put into caring for students. Yes, this is so important. Okay, so take this wherever you wrote it, keep it. Um, Oh yeah, here we go. Madison gave some receipts. Madison knows from Penn's research that bills that restrict talking about LGBTQ plus people are dangerous. In Florida, they saw thousands of books across the state pulled in response to don't say gay policies. This would put a huge burden on librarians and educators in whatever state. Yeah, that's perfect. You can look at Florida. You can look at how some things have gone in Utah because so many states are pursuing these statewide book ban policies that Utah sort of started. So these are just some examples. Wherever you wrote down your examples, your notes, keep those because even if you're not ready to go testify tomorrow, even if there's not a bill necessarily in your state that needs testimony, this can be something to help you get past the blank page. And anyone who's been a writer or written anything at any point knows how terrifying that blank page can be. Congratulations, you're past it. We did it together. Okay, so I will give it back, or well, now we can turn to the discussion.